Welcome to another opening video, this time on the Dutch defence, which after white plays d4, the weapon that we have against this is f5. So this is quite a sharp opening for black. Often you'll see the engine doesn't really rate what you're doing, but it creates quite good attacking chances for black, often with a kingside attack. And white often doesn't prepare so much against the Dutch, so it can be a good surprise weapon relative to some of the other main lines. So I was going to start with like a best case scenario of what you're trying to get out of this as a black player and some of the ideas and themes before looking at some more detailed options for you. So let's look at a kind of sample best case scenario for you. Often white tries to put 2 pawns in the centre, d4 and c4, and our setup we have a knight on f6 after white develops, a pawn on e6, and actually a lot of these moves can be relatively interchangeable. The exact move order doesn't matter so much, it's more of a system style. G3 is a common plan from white, and we'll look at what happens when they try and bring their bishop out on this diagonal versus what happens if they try and bring it on this diagonal. How does our plan change? But often G3 is a good solid plan from white in a kind of Catalan style. And one way that I like to play that's slightly different from what you'll usually see is bishop out to b4. So the usual option is bishop to e7, but I prefer it out to b4. Because in the Dutch, by playing the move f5 on move 1, you're trying to play against the e4 square. So in a lot of these cases, if white can get an e4, they're going to have a better game and a better position than you. So we're trying to throw everything at it to try and lock up the e4 square. So by putting our bishop onto b4 and pinning it, it's negating the effect of this knight, which is why I prefer it out here and often traded rather than on e7, where it often doesn't have much play in the game. So if something like the queen comes out, we'll push our pawn up to d6. Again, preparing one of the other ideas in the Dutch, which is usually how you react to pawn breaks. So one of the key pawn breaks that white could have is being able to play d5, because they'd love to be able to play d5 and trade off your e-pawn. So in general, against d5, you want to be pushing forward with e5, keeping the structure closed, and again, that would help us prepare f4 in the future. And similarly, if they're able to play e4, we either want to be able to meet that with e5 ourselves, or if we can't meet it with e5, with f4. So they're the kind of themes of the position that we want to be going for. So bishop now comes to g2, again trying to cement the e4 square. I like to get rid of that knight, and queen takes. And now simply castles, and after they get their knight out, we can either look at a couple of themes here. One is playing a5, which is a bit of a prophylactic move, because often what will happen here is that we're trying to play on the king side and launch an attack over here, and therefore white is trying to get some counterplay on this side of the board. So often you'll see moves like b4, c5, a4. So one of the common ideas that black can play for is a5 to help prevent against b4. The other one, you're more than happy to put your knight into the e4 square. That's a good solid hold for it. Neither defend it by bringing the second one over to support it. And the kind of third thematic attacking line that I'm going to go into with this demonstration is by playing queen to e8. So often what's categorized in this classical Dutch is moving your queen over to the e8 square and then coming up to either g6, most likely h5 to start an attack over here, which I'll try and demonstrate. So, like I say, if white ever pushes with d5, we're more than happy to see this, and we meet that with e5, keeping the structure closed, bringing a bit of life now to our bishop, that we're only one pawn push away from releasing it, and blocking off white's bishop from attacking our pawns. So we're very happy if we see that. White castles, and now just to kind of demonstrate the attacking ideas, we play queen h5 here. White will come down the other side of the board, and now just to get you the idea of it, f4 is another classic pawn sacrifice that you can go for. The engine thinks there's ways for white to defend against this, but you'll find in practice pushing f4 will lead you to a lot of practical chances. Often they won't take, and they'll continue to play on the queen side, and that allows us to play our bishop up to h3, which is again the second phase of this attack, is you want your queen on h5 followed by your bishop on h3. The idea being that we'll be able to trade off white's key defender of their king side, open up our rook to eliminate their knight, which is their other key defender, and then hop in with our knight to attack the weak squares in the white position. So if they continue to ignore us and push pawns forwards and keep coming at us, I think we're now in a position we're getting close to being able to launch a deadly attack. So the final piece, and this is the kind of main placement you want your pieces, is a knight on g4, a queen on h5, and this bishop on h3. And this is now started to become quite a deadly position that white needs to be very careful of. If they play just continuing their ideas and ignoring what they're doing, a5, we're now ready to strike. We can get rid of the first pawn, and when they take back, we're now ready to start a mass trade that's going to spell disaster for white. Get rid of the bishop, get rid of the knight, even if it means sacrificing a rook, and you can already see the position here is -3, so I can just say a continuation. If they take with the king, we're able to take the pawn with the knight, forking the king and the rook, and if rook takes, we've got mate 2 here. If queen takes, king back, and queen up, checkmate. So this is just a sample idea of the best case you can hope for. The main takeaways are this placement of your bishop, your knight, and your queen. The idea, if they're pushing their pawn, you want to push yours the other way. The idea that you can sack a pawn on f4 if it's taken, or leave it there for them to choose if they want to open it up with their g pawn to release your bishop this way. So that's the kind of best case and some of the ideas of what you want to be achieving with this 8-mate. So what's some of the other ideas? So again, the move order doesn't matter so much about whether you start with f5 or with your knight or your pawn out first. So this is the kind of position that we'll get. And then, like I say, I like playing bishop up to b4. And then if they let me trade, I'm feeling quite happy about this. I've got rid of their defender, or one of their knight, which was defending the e4, attacking the e4 square. I've doubled up their pawns, and I've traded it for a bishop that wasn't going to have much play in the game. So just a kind of sample line, d6, knight out, castles, and then hopping in with e4 with our knight. Like I said originally, this is one of the other ideas that we can go for. Attacking the backward c3 pawn in a really good central position, and often it's quite difficult for white to try and kick this piece out. Because again, we've got ideas now of trying to protect it with our other knight. So if queen comes out, we can bring our knight over, and if they push the pawn, just defending it again. So this is the kind of optic of something that looks nice that we can go for. And again, we've got options of sliding our queen over here, trying to lock down the position maybe with like a b6, or pushing it open with these pawn pushes to get this standard kind of attack with the bishop coming out. So a lot of these have looked at what happens when white brings their bishop out to g2, which I think is the best play for white to go for. But what happens if they choose to bring their bishop out on this diagonal instead? Does that change how we play? So the first couple of moves will all be pretty standard. Again, I'll bring the bishop out here, look to trade it, so this is pretty standard. And if they bring their bishop out, we're quite happy to trade that off as well. And now e3 gives you the main indication that they're not going to go for the fianchetto. Instead, they're going to be bringing their bishop out this way, because it's quite weakening to play both g3 and e3. Doesn't offer them a lot. So it's usually the main indication. Once you see e3, all right, the bishop's coming out to this side. So we can castle, and there we see bishop coming out to d3. So given that they're not on this diagonal, we can take that diagonal for ourselves. We can play b6, and after they castle, we can put our bishop on b7. And again, has great scope with this bishop. And we've got ideas in the future, maybe playing d6 and walking our knight up to this square where it's then protected by the bishop. Often in the Dutch, you have a hard time, or that the two knights don't often have natural squares to get into. So if we just go through this line, I'm going to put the bishop on e7 for illustrative purposes. They come out here in castles. Again, this is all what you'll see in the Dutch in hundreds and hundreds of games. We'll play d6 in castles, start off with our queen sliding over to e8, ready to come over and attack. Now, I'd say in some games you can put your knight on e4, and actually you're not so, even if I do it from here, if you could put your knight on e4 here, and you're not that bothered about trading. This is an often idea, because if the knight goes back, you've got d5, solidifying it down. And again, if there's any trade here, you're in a really good pawn structure position. You've got a really central e4 pawn that's causing some damage against the white position. So you have got the option of launching your knight forward there. But the question often becomes, what do we do with this b8 knight? Because in a lot of openings, you play it forward to c6. However, you can't do that in a lot of the positions in the Dutch, because if you play c6, it allows white to play the move d5. And as we mentioned, often when white plays d5, we want to meet that with e5, but we obviously can't here because we've got a knight hanging. And if we move our knight away, it's going to be gobbled up on e6 and start to damage our structure. So in a lot of cases, the knight instead will have to develop itself out to d7, but there's an interesting way where you can get it out to c6. So if I flip forward a few moves, say we bring our queen over to start going for the attack. Once you see the queen coming to c2, this will allow you the opportunity, if you want to get your b8 knight out. And what's the idea behind this? So with the queen now on c2, we could bring our knight out, and if they push it forwards, we've got the square b4 for our knight. However, you'll see if we do this straight away, the queen can attack the knight, and our knight is hanging, as well as this pawn, and we can't defend both threats. So instead, rather than bringing our knight out straight away, we can start with the move a5. Kind of two-purpose. One is it stops them pushing forward with b4, and we've seen this is quite a good idea to be playing in general. And the other being that now, if they stay playing a move like b3, we're able to bring our knight out to c6. And if they go for the same idea now of playing d5, when we push up to b4, it's supported by the pawn. So even if the queen was able to attack the knight, it's supported by the pawn, and we're in time to push. So say the queen moves, we can now play e5, and we've got a really good position. So that's the kind of exception to the rule about when you can get your knight out this way. So the Dutch often played against the first move of d4, but I think actually it works well, if not better, against the English with c4. So we can start again with f5, and after they play this kind of standard moves of c3, we're able to play the move e5 in one go. As you've seen, when they play d4, playing e5 is not usually an option because we don't want to mess up our structure. But actually here we can get the move e5 in, we'll likely defend it with d6, and we bring more scope to our light squared bishop. So actually I really like this setup, particularly against English players, because you get more advanced pawn control than you would do against a d4 Dutch setup. So just going through a kind of standard developing moves, we'll put the bishop on e7 here. Again, you're more than welcome to put it on b4 and trade it for the c3 knight for the same reasons. But after some standard developing moves, our queen moving over for the same attacking idea, you can see the kind of position that we can get. Looks very similar to before, but we've just got the advanced pawn on e5, and white's pawn is further back on d3 rather than d4. Now a common idea, or an idea that they might go for, is to jump their knight forward into d5, and you think, oh no, my dark square bishop and the pawn are both attacked here. But regardless of whether the knight comes this way or this way, a common move in the structure is to bring your bishop back to d8. So this is another thing to highlight. Your bishop often will sit back on d8, defending the c7 pawn, and it's often the light squared bishop that goes out to attack. I think that's a lot of the mainline theory that I wanted to go through. So next up would be interesting to show a high rated game played on League Chess that demonstrates a lot of these themes. So the players here are mid 2600s and mid 2400s, and actually the white player's 2600 and the black player's 2460. So we get there by a bit of a transposition of move order, but you'll see pretty straight away we get f5 and e5 in. So it's against an English, and we get all the kind of standard moves that we've looked at. And like I say, the move order isn't so critical, it's more system based about where you want to be placing your pieces. They go for the queen slide over to e8, and then up to h5. So they started the first stage of the attack by bringing the queen over. White is responding by pushing their pawns on the queen side of the board. And now the kind of thematic break, f4, asking white, you can have this pawn if you want it, but you're going to move your g-pawn in the process and open up my rook in the process. So white often declines, as they have done in the game, and instead continues to push on the queen side. And that allows black to play kind of stage 2 of getting their pieces in the optimum position. They've now got a queen on h5 and a bishop on h3. Usually now you try and get your knight into g4 and start trading the pieces and forcing the checkmate. White continues a5, knight final piece in now, so you've got the triangle of pieces where you want them, the knight jumping into g4, and the evaluation is starting to reflect this and be slightly more favourable for black, and certainly it's black that's got all the initiative here. Knight into e4, developing the final piece, knight to d7, and then rook over to e1, already now a -2 position, as black can start eliminating some of the white pieces. So white sense they're in trouble, starts to retreat their bishop. Black eliminates the knight. This isn't all perfect play, but you get the idea of the thematics of what you're trying to do. They take the g3 pawn, which white takes back. And now this really interesting move of bishop up to f1, saying you can have my bishop if you want it. Now if rook takes, there's a really good continuation. You get rid of the defending knight, and if you were to take back, it's mate. And pretty similarly, if you're taking here with the king, get rid of the bishop, knight's going there, and then your choice of how you want to get mate is. Rook takes is one option to finish that off. So they were setting the trap by playing the bishop there. White obviously can't take it. They go for a check instead. The king moves over, and white gets greedy and takes the b7 pawn. Really, given all the interest that's on up here, white doesn't have time to be taking pawns down on b7. And now after rook takes f3, a really interesting move, because you can actually give up the a8 rook with check, because it's such a devastating attack. So you're threatening now mate pretty much with the queen there and coming over. So that's why you don't have time to take the rook, because if you were to see that, if you were to take on a8 and say the rook comes down, you're in trouble, because if you try and move your queen anywhere, it's mate in two, queen up, and checkmate. So what did we get in the game? After queen takes, only a couple more moves, bishop back to f8, and after rook a2, white just resigned. And why does white resign? Well, simply queen check there and mate. So that's, again, very similar to the best case scenario you can see of black trying to push on the king side, white trying to break through on the queen side. The final part to look at, though, is what happens in the Staunton gambit. So after we start off with d4 and f5, white can play this really tricky line with e4, the Staunton gambit, and black needs to know their theory here, or they can get swept off the board pretty quickly. And it's for that reason that sometimes black will choose not to start with f5, but instead play e6. And then you can get there by transposition, so after c4, we can play f5, and we're back into our standard opening prep. However, playing e6 is an invitation to the French, and white has the option of playing e4, and there is then no more f5, and instead you'll have to play some French lines. So it's kind of a pros and cons, that by starting with e6, you might have to play the French. However, if you start with f5, you will need to know the Staunton gambit. So what is the Staunton gambit? Well, to start off, you need to take it. And then the usual way that white will play is knight to c3, attacking that pawn. We'll defend it with knight f6. They'll put pressure on our knight with bishop g5, saying wanting to take back here. Now you can go wrong straight away, so if you play something like d5, you're in trouble, because after trading, this queen is coming out here and you're in for some trouble. So after g6, they're picking up this pawn, probably going to win a second one here, and this is not what you want. So I'll show you the lines that you need to be playing if you're going to play the Staunton gambit, or at least what I'd play as black, or I do play as black. So g6, most common now is to see the trade, and then the knight can pick it up. So then we go into d5, knight g3, and you've kind of successfully negotiated the position here. So you're level on material, but you're only 2 moves away from castling. You can put some pressure on the position, whereas white's got to move both the knight and the bishop before they're able to castle. So, and according to the engine, you're slightly better in this line. So what else can they play? Bishop takes f6, one option. The other one f3, kind of gambiting a second pawn. It is possible to take it, but best is d5, and you'll often see f takes here, capture with the knight, and then we'll trade with knight coming in and pawn coming in. Continuations from here, usually bishop coming out to c4, developing back with knight c6. You've got lines like this, and then like c3 is often played, knight a5s and such like. One critical line again, going to the Staunton Gambit, knight there. This is all pretty standard. Another kind of scary looking move is h4, of like how do we deal with this? And again, you can just play d5 here, and if they push with h5, a couple of ways you can combat it, but I think the kind of cleanest is rook to g8, h takes, and you've kind of got yourself out of a lot of the troubles that you were going to face in this line. The other way you're going about it, rather than playing rook over, is bishop up to f5, and you'll often see bishop taking on f6 is most commonly played. E takes, paving the way for g4, which looks a bit scary, but actually after bishop e6 and the pawn takes, you're doing just fine here. You obviously can't take back because the rook is coming down, but you can just play queen d7 and you're totally fine in this position. So you need to know what you're doing in the Staunton Gambit, but if you do, you're totally fine, and oftentimes you'll know more theory than white will do because you play f5 all the time. Great, thanks for watching.